So this video will go over the gradient editor, and I will do it using a layer style. So I've created a shape on the canvas. Doesn't matter what color it is, because this will be replaced by the gradient overlay. So I will select the layer, and I will double click here to activate the layer styles. As you know from previous videos, there's many different ways to pop up this layer style window. And again, I will move it to the side. By moving it to the side, I'm able to see the canvas better while I am adjusting the effect. So I will click on Gradient Overlay. Make sure to click on the tab, because if you only click on the arrow, you will not activate these options. So just be sure to click on the text here, the tab, for the effect. So these are the settings that are currently being applied. So this is the previous gradient that I used. So I'm going to just click Reset to Default to hope that we get to a more common state. So this might be the default that you see when you activate a layer style. If it's different, don't worry about it, because you can play with all these settings to customize the effect. So you have basic options here to change the blend mode, which we will discuss some other time. The opacity. So remember, it's an overlay, so it's getting applied to all the effects beneath it, and it's getting applied to whatever is on the layer itself beneath it. So if you reduce the opacity, you will let some of the effects below it come through, or the original layer will start to be shown through because you have some transparency being applied. So let me just keep this back at 100%. This is what we're going to customize in a moment, this bar over here. But just to show you that you could change the way the gradient behaves. Right now we have a linear gradient, so that means a line from the start color to the end color. So from here we have a dark gray going to a light gray, and you can see that over here, dark gray going to a light gray. It's aligned with the layer, so you might experiment to see what happens when this isn't applied, but right now I want the gradient to be perfectly matched with the layer. So it starts at the beginning of where there are pixels, and it ends where there are no more pixels. You can change the linear gradient to be radial. So this is a circular gradient, so it's as if the gradient goes from the center to the edge, and then it makes a complete circle around. You have angles that you could play with. You have reflected, and you have a diamond. I'm going to stick to the linear gradient because it is the easiest to see, and I will change the angle to go to 0 degrees, so it's going from left to right, and it is perfectly matched with the gradient bar over here. And you could change the scale. So right now it's being matched perfectly to 100% of the layer, but if I increase this, it's a little hard to see, but you'll see how you can change the way that the gradient is actually being applied to the layer. So here at 18%, you can see the gradient is actually a solid color here. The gradient is only being applied here at this 18% area, and then it's the solid color again, which represents the end of the gradient. So I'll just return that to 100%. And what I really want to show you in this video is the gradient editor. So you can click the down arrow here to choose a preset. So Photoshop comes with a bunch of default gradients or preset gradients that you can find organized into these folders. So you could click on the arrow of a folder. I just chose the reds, and you'll see a bunch of cool gradients in the red category. I have to say, this is one of the improvements I really like with Photoshop, is that right out of the box, it gives you some pretty nice gradients to work with. When you're done, you can simply press enter to close that window. Try to get in the habit of doing that actually. I see lots of people trying to get out of a menu and they click somewhere. But if you click somewhere, you risk creating a new action. So I would get used to pressing the enter button or the escape button to close these menus. So like I was saying, if you want to customize your gradient even further, you can actually click on this bar over here. When you click on this bar, you get into the gradient editor. So once again, I'm going to take this window and drag it to the side. That way I can actually see what I'm working on while I'm adjusting my gradient. So this editor has a bunch of different ways you can control it. Up here where I'm dragging, you can see the presets, same like we had before, where you can go in and choose a new gradient. So you'll notice this gradient has two colors, and you can see them represented here with what's called a color stop, 1 and 2. So if I were to choose this one, for example, notice how it has a third one here in the middle. So this gradient actually has 1, 2, and 3 color stops, and you can see that over here as the color goes from 1 to a lighter blue to a darker blue. So that's 3 colors. So you can see that you can get really wild with the amount of color stops that you use and the colors that you put into them. So let's show you how to customize this. So I'm going to go back to just a basic 2-color gradient. And to change the color of a color stop, you can come and click on it. When you click on the color stop, the options of that color stop appear. And here you'll have control to change the color by clicking on the swatch and using the color picker. Or you can actually double click on a color stop. By double clicking, you pop up the color picker. So 2 different ways to change the color. You can either double click or click to activate it and choose the color swatch over here. You also have a value here to change the location. Right now, it's at 0%. So 0% represents right here on the left side at the beginning. So you can click and drag to move the location. So you'll see now it is at 31%, and everything before is just a solid color. So the gradient won't start until it actually hits the 31% mark. You can see that here in my shape where it's a solid color, and the gradient starts right about here where it starts to fade into the other color. So that's what a gradient is. It's a transition, a smooth transition from one color stop to another, and you could control the rate and position at which it starts to do that. So let me put this back here to the edge at 0%. You could also do this by typing in a value. So if you know you want it exactly at 50%, you can simply type in 50% and it will move there. But I'm going to put it back here to 0 and show you can click on the other color stop and do the same thing. Let me choose something contrasting, so actually, so it's very easy to see. Okay, there we go. So I've now customized the colors to specific colors that I want. You also have this marker here in the middle. This marker is the middle point. So right now it's an equal transition from one color to the other, but you can drag this around to change the position, the rate at which it switches from one color to another. So by doing this, we have the blue transitioning out very quickly and a lot of space here for the green to transition in. Once this is active, the options here at the bottom change, and all you can do is actually change this location. So I'm going to put it back to 50% just to make it an equal transition. What if you want to add colors? So this bar over here is pretty interactive, and this area where I'm dragging my mouse now is showing you the place where you can click to create a new color stop. So any point here where you click will add a new color stop. Okay, so it uses the previous color, so I'm just going to come in and change that color. Let's put something contrasting like a red. And you can see now I've created a 3-color gradient. I could move this color stop around and even play with the middle markers for the transition between the individual colors. If you want to get rid of this color stop, you can simply click on the delete button, or you can click and drag it away. So I just clicked on it and dragged it away from the bar, and that deletes it. So to recap, click under the bar to create a color stop, and you can drag it away or click the delete button to get rid of it. This bar on top as well does some stuff. So you might have noticed these stops here on the top. So these are the opacity stops. Okay, so right now if I click on the first opacity stop, you see the options on top, on bottom get activated, And instead of being the same as the color stop, we have an opacity marker. So you see the color stop has the opacity grayed out and the color active, but the opacity stop has the opposite. The color is grayed out and we have the opacity. So this opacity allows us to change the opacity of the color stop beneath it. So if I were to reduce this value, let's make it 0%. You can see how the blue starts to fade out. So you can see the gradient here in the gradient editor. So here we're at 0% opacity, so it's completely invisible, and it starts to fade in over time. So the gradient is taking place from 0% opacity to this opacity stop of 100%. What that means is whatever we put here is faded out, but then this color over here gets faded in. So it's easy to see in the gradient editor. You just have to keep in mind that the um, the layer itself has a color, and that's what we're seeing show through over here. So let me show this a little more simply by choosing a black and white gradient, and then taking the white color and reducing its opacity to 0. So now we can see that the original layer, which was green, is showing through. And just here on this left side is where we have the 100% opacity black color fading in. So this is a very cool way to create a shadow-like effect or a spotlight effect. And I'll show you that by switching the gradient from can we do it in this menu? I'm trying to create a radial gradient. So I'm going to push OK and switch the linear gradient to a radial gradient. Okay, so we now have darkness in the center and lightness on the edge. I want the opposite actually. So I'm going to click reverse over here. And you see that takes the gradient and switches the color stops and reverses them. And what I could do now is reduce the opacity just enough so we see a bit of a darkness around the edges, a bit of a vignetting effect, and it looks like this spotlight is being cast onto our object, and it's a pretty cool effect. So I think that's all I want to talk about with the gradient. This is for those who are interested in creating custom gradients. So it's a very powerful feature inside Photoshop to create custom gradients, and you could have a lot of fun with it. This is for a little spotlight effect. You can do it to create interesting colors. And as we will see when we work with images, you can actually use it to create some really cool effects, some lighting effects to blend with your images. So it's good to get to know it. It is a little bit more advanced, but I hope you enjoyed.